Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Teaching English webinar for teacher educators. My name is Shirin Saraz, and I'll be your moderator today. Thank you all for joining this live event. In this session, Naomi Flynn will join us, and we'll be exploring how teacher educators should work with teachers to develop learners' Oracy skills. So, as usual, before we start the session, I'd like to share a number of quick housekeeping reminders with you. While waiting, please share with us in the Q&A where you are from. If you work in pre-service teacher education, type pre-service. If you work in in-service teacher education, type in-service in the Q&A. And this session is being recorded, and a recording of the webinar will be available on Teaching English in the next couple of days. And the link to the certificate will be provided in the thank you email that you'll receive tomorrow. And you will have a chance to ask questions during the session. So please use the Q&A to ask our presenter your questions. We'll be using the chat for announcements. So let me introduce our presenter today. Naomi Flynn is a professor of multilingual education at the Institute of Education, University of Reading. She discusses arguments for positioning Oracy more centrally in the curriculum, and through insights and practical examples, Dr. Flynn will suggest ways in which teacher educators can guide teachers in promoting intentional dialogue in the classroom. So welcome, Naomi, and over to you.
Thanks so much, Siren. It's great to see you. And I think Andrea's going to share my slides in a moment because we had a bit of trouble in the preamble trying to get that to work. There we go. Thanks, Andrea. Hello and welcome to everybody. I understand there are quite a large number of you out there, and I'm sorry I can't get to see you all personally. Just so you know where I am, I'm teaching. I teach at the University of Reading, Reading's close to London in England, so it's about midday with us here. And my background is perhaps unlike some of yours in that I'm somebody who was a teacher and school principal in schools where lots of children came to us who had what is described in English policy as English as an additional language. So my background is about teaching children who come to England and are having to learn English alongside having to learn the curriculum. So a little different from some of yours where you're perhaps got more of kind of TEFL, TESOL type learning environments with your children or adults or whoever you're working with. But I hope that the things that I have to say today, which are based on my research and my work with both pre-service and in-service teachers, I hope there's something in there for everyone. It was really nice to see the pre-webinar responses to the questions. It gave me a nice feel for the fact that lots of you out there know an awful lot, understandably, given the expertise that you bring to the table today. And also some of you were saying you don't know a lot, and so I hope that I can kind of give you something as a takeaway. But basically, we're talking today about what I have come to call intentional dialogue. And that basically the main headline is that teachers need to talk less and listen more in order that children or their students can say more if they're going to develop their spoken and other forms of English or any other language that they're learning. So let's see where we get to. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about my own research journey because it's quite hard to engage with the more practical content I'm going to show you without me giving you some background. So up front, we do get some theory and some background, as it were. And I'm also going to talk to you about what we call in the UK at the moment, Oracy education. And why it works for learners of new languages. And Oracy education is something that's become bigger in UK policy, education policy recently than it has been in the past. And that's quite an exciting development. But it basically sits very nicely alongside my research around trying to make practice intentionally dialogic. So I'm going to talk about what it is, and then we're going to look about the second half of the presentation really is about what does it look like in multilingual classrooms. And I'll be drawing on research that I've done with schools in both the UK and in the US. Okay, just a little word about terminology to start with. So you'll hear me use the term maybe EAL, English as an additional language, and that is the term that's used in policy in the UK to describe children and young people who speak languages other than English at home. In other words, that the heritage languages they speak, the home languages they speak, are not English. Okay. And this is used by teachers and policymakers over here. I prefer the term multilingual because it celebrates these learners' linguistic skills and their heritage languages rather than giving them a kind of a deficit label that's saying, you know, you don't yet have English, so we're going to label you with what you can't do. But I do use them a bit interchangeably. But when I say multilingual, I basically mean children who are needing to learn a language of the classroom that is not their home language, which hopefully resonates with a number of your settings and contexts, which I realize are very different from mine. Okay, then there will be time to ask questions soon, by the way. I'm going to do the introduction to all this stuff, and then you can ask questions if you need to. Okay, so in terms of my research context, there are my islands, the islands of the United Kingdom. And approximately 21% of students in schools in the UK are multilingual or have a home language other than English, which you might find quite surprising because I sometimes think, understandably, that the worldview of what it's like to be English is that everybody looks and sounds like I do, basically. But this is not the case. We are a very super diverse nation linguistically for a whole range of reasons related to our colonial past, related to more recent migration, and obviously related to families that come to us because they're fleeing conflict and persecution. So we do have a very wide number of languages in the UK. In Greater London, for example, there are more than 360 languages spoken alone. And when I was a head teacher of a school in East London, we had around 27 languages spoken, and that was fairly normal. Okay. And in fact, a school that I'm going to talk about extensively in this presentation a bit later, that I worked with over 5 years, they have 98% of their children have English as an additional language. In other words, everybody is a speaker of other languages. Everybody is a linguist and multilingual. So going to the second point there, despite the fact that we have so many of these children, unfortunately, over the years, some children don't make age-expected levels of progress. And that means that perhaps that's because they come in later to school. They start school at, say, 10, or maybe at secondary, sort of 14, and it's hard for them to make progress. There are a range of reasons, which I can't go into now, about why some children don't make those levels of progress in English and therefore in the curriculum. But it is a challenge. Alongside that, funds to support their learning needs have been reduced, certainly since 2010. There's some relationship between funding in the country and the kind of political complexion of the government of the time. Not entirely, though, as I'm sure it is with your context as well. There just has not been very much money expended on children who are multilingual. And part of the problem, therefore, is you get a kind of double whammy where teachers feel ill-equipped to teach them because there's nothing on this supporting their learning needs. And the teachers also have very limited access to professional learning to address this. And that's what my work is all about. It's trying to create ways of working with these children that schools can take, pick up and run as part of their school improvement plans. And that's what I'm working with at the moment. So because there's so little out there, the work I do with schools is about, okay, so what can we work with in ways that are really cost effective? But which have improvement outcomes. For some schools, the fact that funding isn't prioritised, and also if you look at the national curriculum, which we have, makes very little reference to multilingualism, it means that they then don't prioritise training in their school development planning. So you get this kind of perfect storm, or imperfect storm, we might say, of things that just don't work. Lack of funding, poor teacher confidence, no reference to it in the national curriculum. So there's a kind of a loss of it, and it tends to get kind of bound up in a whole discourse around special needs, which is very unhelpful. So there is a current policy focus on Oracy education, as I said, just started with our new Labour government. But that also is commonly framed within a deficit perspective and very much tied up with kind of social class. You know, as if we're trying to teach children with working class accents to say something so that they sound a bit posher, if you think about the whole English stereotype of what things should sound about. So all in all, politically and policy-wise in the UK, things are quite complex if you are a teacher who is teaching children who are multilingual, or if you are a teacher educator who needs to train your students to teach it with multilingual children. So what we tend to have to do, therefore, is draw on what we know about effective pedagogy for multilingual learners. And I have very much summarized what I think make the key elements of multilingual learners' pedagogy. And indeed, we've built these into my current project, which I'm doing with Hampshire County Council, which is a district in England, where we're looking at some principles of what works in order to help schools kind of move forward with the sort of activities they might do. And fundamentally, we feel that school belonging has to come first, before, and well before that sense of, do I understand the grammar of the language? We also feel that a celebration of identities and of heritage languages as part of that school belonging is absolutely fundamental. So it's about mindset. It's about having a positive orientation to diversity. And you can see that the supporting references are in there, which if you want to look at those at the end. But fundamentally, what I'm about is this talk-rich curriculum. So making the curriculum more about talking and much less about writing, more about the children's talk and much less about the teacher's talk. In other words, the teacher being what I call intentionally dialogic. So setting up experiences through which the children or the students, whichever age you're working with, can have dialogue that's meaningful, that builds on each other's ideas, that kind of goes somewhere, and that enables them to question the status quo. So as part of that, you need teachers who actively listen and therefore scaffold language use. And this is remarkably difficult. And the teachers that I'm working with at the moment all say that the thing that's hard for them is saying less, because teachers are so used to being the kind of sage on the stage at the front of the classroom, and that's hard. Pedagogy for multilingual learners also needs to draw on critical sociocultural pedagogy. And I'm just going to pause on that in the next slide. Obviously, those of you out there who are very well versed in what we mean by critical sociocultural pedagogy, and it's a whole lecture on its own, so I won't go into it too much, but these are what it means to me. So drawing on the work of the great Gloria Ladson-Billings, who introduced us to culturally responsive teaching and now talks a lot about culturally and linguistically responsive teaching, and indeed sociocultural pedagogy. For her, it stresses the importance of teaching which celebrates the home identities of students. And what's really important are these three terms: makes learning relevant, relatable, and therefore engaging. So it's all about setting out opportunities to talk about things that your students actually care about. It also, so looking at the work of another great, Paulo Freire, my apologies for my dreadful Portuguese pronunciation in that, the Brazilian activist who saw teachers as, that teachers and students need to have learning as a joint venture, rather than that learning is imposed. And he was talking very much about imposing the language of the classroom in terms of not using heritage languages, for example. And Alison Phipps, who's based at Glasgow, who is in Scotland in the UK, talks about when critical sociocultural pedagogy is related to language education, that might, for example, include consciously challenging the dominant status of English and promoting home languages in the classroom. So I hope that gives you some sense of what it is I mean by critical sociocultural pedagogy, but I know we could talk about it for a very long time. So drawing on the thinking on the previous slide, the thing that I've been working with over some years now, since 2018, is the work of my lovely colleague, Anna Latimont. Professor Anna Latimont is at the School of Education at the University of Indiana in Indianapolis. And she's developed these things called the Enduring Principles of Learning, that together form an approach to learning that is sociocultural, inquiry-led, small group, and intentionally dialogic. And I put down the left-hand side of the slide there the references that support that. But fundamentally, it's about doing what I said several slides ago, and making happen in practice those elements of pedagogy that we think will work with our multilingual learners, whichever context we're learning them in, or we're teaching them in, as it were. And what's great, looking at the fourth bullet point there, she has proven success with their raising attainment for both mono and multilingual pupils. So she works largely in linguistically diverse classrooms, but the outcomes, the academic outcomes for these children in language and literacy, using this approach where teachers are intentionally dialogic, where there's a form of oracy education threaded throughout, does lead to improvements. And I myself have also found in my recent work, bringing the enduring principles of learning over to the UK, in classrooms in England, we found that when teachers were trained with professional development that drew on these principles, that and then taught using these principles, that the children in their classrooms who were multilingual made better progress in speaking, listening, and in reading comprehension than those children that were in our control groups. And finally, there's too much to say about this, but there's going to be a link in a slide, a link in the chat, sorry, at some point to my most recent finished project, where you can find out more about them if you want to. But the thing that teachers really like about these is there is a rubric that goes with them that brings a theory to life. So something describes what does this principle look like? Say joint productive activity, which is small group work. What does it look like when a teacher's just getting going with it, when they're actually embedding it, and when they're really enacting it? So there's lots of support as well for teachers, which is why it's much liked. You can ask me a little bit about that in the questions, but that's what I've been working with. So let's leave words behind and look at a picture. Oh, I see Andrea just put the link in the chat. Thank you, Andrea, to my most recent project. So this is the thing that really set me on fire a few years ago when I went to Indianapolis, and saw teachers teaching who had been trained in this intentionally dialogic way of teaching. And these children are in a class where the teacher had developed something called book club. And what they did was they were all multilingual. No, they was, beg your pardon, there were 19 out of 26 in the class were multilingual. But this group here were all multilingual, mostly with Spanish as a heritage language, because they were from Latin American countries originally. And she'd set up book club. You can see one of the children on the right-hand side, they've got little yellow stickies on their books. So the children came together in groups of 3 with a book they had chosen. The sticky notes do things like they had to record things like the main idea of what they wanted to talk about, the new vocabulary they'd come across in that chapter, a question they had that they wanted to ask their friends about, and connections that they wanted to make between chapters. So she trained them up over time to do this just for a 45-minute session once a week. So it's not happening in every lesson, where they were in charge of what they were doing. The children are, you can see there's a 4 in the middle of the carpet there, and that's about where they're up to in the activities that the teacher wants them to do. They're on their 4th activity, and you can see other handouts and so on, which are kind of more about writing activity. But fundamentally, this was about talk-rich teaching, where the children were discussing, often arguing. Had a wonderful argument that the boys worked out originally was eventually was about the tense. One of them misunderstood the tense the activity had in the chapter had been written in, and all the rest of it. So lots and lots of talk. And the teacher in this room is facilitating where needed, but a lot of the time is just very light touch dropping in on children's conversations because they are managing it. So that was like a very exciting example of bringing those enduring principles of teaching to life. Okay, so let's talk about this word oracy as well. So alongside intentional dialogue, my current work is about creating oracy resources for teachers who have multilingual learners. And as I said, at the moment, I'm trying that out with one district in the UK. And oracy teaching in the UK is defined as this quotation on the right-hand side here. Students have opportunities to use their languages to speak eloquently, articulate ideas and thoughts, influence through listening, listen to others, and have the confidence to express their views. So it's not just talking, and a lot of you got that in the pre-webinar responses that you provided us with, which is absolutely great. That it's bigger than just talking. It's bigger than what used to be called in the national curriculum speaking and listening. It's about developing talk as a powerful tool through which learners have agency to manage their own learning, to think about things, to question the status quo, which is very much at the heart of critical socio-cultural pedagogy. But fundamentally, it's about teachers planning intentionally to say less in order that learners say more. And the picture in this one, I realize it's got a spelling mistake where the teachers put after reading pages, and it should just say page 174. This was a US classroom. Kids were only just back after lockdown, after COVID lockdown, and working individually. So she got them to record things they wanted to say on post-it notes so that she could then draw that together. So it's a really nice way of trying to kind of bring them in without kind of having to go to every single one, because lockdown meant they couldn't all work together. So Oracy teaching is also about promoting student voice in the way that we saw on that previous slide, but also this slide, teachers promoting student talk through tools such as sentence stems. So this is something I've used a lot, and the schools I'm working with at the moment, most of them have chosen sentence stems as a way of driving forward how they make the classroom more talk rich. And it's about giving children access to things that help them take the lead in conversation. So this, again, was from an Indiana classroom. There's a range of, there's kind of when you want to make a connection and a list of ways in which you might do that. What's nice is it's when you're listening as well, you know, listen attentively and listen silently, be prepared to add. So it's not just about the talk, as it were, how to agree, how to disagree, how to ask for help, all sorts of ways in which talking. And schools I've worked with have used this in various ways, which I'll show you a little bit later. So Oracy teaching is about this. It's about promoting student voice, and it's also about promoting inquiry-led classrooms. So good Oracy teaching, good intentional dialogue allows us to set up opportunities for asking questions. This again is also from the US. This was in a school that had an entirely inquiry-led curriculum using the International Baccalaureate, in fact. And all their units of learning were statements of inquiry. So rather than having we're going to learn about statistical modeling, you know, we're going to use statistics and look at patterns in data to uncover inequity in relationships between, for example, poverty and opportunities for doing certain things in the city in which they they lived, for example. So that it's about that kind of open-ended, more complex thinking. And ultimately, this supports better literacy outcomes as well, because people are talking and therefore they're thinking about what it is they might want to write. Okay, I have said an awful lot there. So does anyone have any questions? And I will have a bit of a rest.
Firstly, Naomi, thank you so much. Yeah, you highlighted some really powerful points, starting from systemic challenges facing UK schools, but these are also, some of these are also common in most countries, including teacher confidence and the importance of creating spaces where all learners feel a sense of belonging and their identities are celebrated. So we have some questions in the Q&A. So one of our participants asked, can we have a one-shoe-fits-all rubric for all speaking sessions and activities?
I don't think so. Because a lot of it's going to depend on the proficiency of your learners, isn't it? So there could be, I think there can be some fundamental principles around which might drive your activities, such as, you know, the opportunities for talk or the opportunities for listening. But fundamentally, we're going to be needing to look at the proficiency and therefore the language learning needs of the learners, really.
And also, are you, let me read that question again. Increasing motivation and similar skills so do you think what do you think about increasing motivation and similar skills, or actually literacy and language skills?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question. Is it, how can the teacher increase motivation, or?
No, I mean, what are, I mean, the question is not, so let me read again. Your thoughts about this. So is the idea is to increase motivation and similar skills,
Yeah,
or literacy and language skills?
all of those. So basically, if you don't start with that, you know, the school belonging and who am I in my school, and why would I be here, and why am I learning, and what do I, you know, I think the motivation has to come first. So it has to be about the way in which we set our classrooms up as places in which children have agency to talk, as places in which learners are seeing images that are like themselves, that are talking about things that matter to them and are about their home and school experiences. So the motivation has to come first, and the language then around that is going to be, you know, better, because it's going to be buried in a much more meaningful context than, say, for example, you know, seeing language and literacy skills as something separate from that sense of school belonging. So I think you can't separate.
Yeah, you mentioned the sense of belonging at the and what are the best ways to instill confidence among learners?
That's a huge question, isn't it?
Yes, so we will cover these. I mean, I'm reading all the questions. So for the moment, there also, is it similar to translanguaging? This is also another.
That's a really good question. So the work that I am doing at the moment does not involve does not explicitly involve translanguaging, but we would certainly hope that any teacher working in this way, in this intentionally dialogic way, would want to include translanguaging as part of their practice. In other words, drawing on the language resources, all the language resources that the children bring to the classroom. So it definitely has resonance with a translanguaging pedagogy, but it doesn't foreground it in the way that the work of people that, you know, are put forward translanguaging pedagogy do. But yeah, definite alignment with it.
So many questions about this. So, well, yeah, we will discuss. You will share with us the tips, advice for teachers. And another question is, how much is the development of the students' heritage language fostered? If yes, what's the impact of it?
That's a really good question. I don't have answers for that, in a way, in that I don't have measures of that at the moment. It's certainly something we need to be looking at next. So it's more, for the moment, my work is more about, you know, recognizing the importance of heritage languages. So because we are English speakers in England, and we are users of the language that, as you all know, I don't need to tell you, has kind of gold standard levels of capital in the world. One of the challenges we have is teachers just worrying so much about children not learning English that there's not necessarily acknowledgement of or celebration of heritage languages. So I'm more at that level, in terms of let's, for goodness sake, look at all linguistic resources instead of just English. But I haven't got a measured outcome in terms of use of heritage languages at the moment. Great question, though.
Thank
We need to
you.
look at that.
So yes, so if you like, we can continue. And yeah, there are also some questions about resources. So we will be sharing some links in the chat throughout the session.
Okay. Well, I'm going to show you things that other schools have, that one other school has done. So hopefully it's useful for you to get an idea. I mean, you can also look at, as I said, the Talk Rich Teaching project, which was the one I did with 4 English schools that Andrea put that link to in the chat. So there's this is, I just want to make clear that this is about a mindset. Okay, so I think one of the things we need to be careful of is thinking that you can go and pick up a resource and do critical sociocultural pedagogy. It's more about, how do I plan my teaching generally? How am I as a teacher in the classroom? Do I stop talking enough? Do I listen attentively to my learners? Do I give them opportunities to listen attentively to each other? So that's really your greatest resource, is you. I think the teacher is always the most expensive resource in the classroom. Anyway, and this is a school that's battled with that. So let's see if it'll go forward. There we go. All right. So this isn't the actual school, but it looks very like this. This is a typical Victorian building of an urban school, primary school in England. Quite a lot of them look like this, and they're kind of quite a maze inside. And this particular one is in the south of England, in an urban setting, with, as it says there, 97% multilingual children. The children are 7 to 11-year-olds. That's what we call a junior school in the UK. This school was having a persistent pattern of inspection-rated underachievement. alongside teachers' low expectations of the multilingual pupils. And that had gone on for some years. We have something in England called Ofsted, which is an inspection framework that's quite is very high stakes. And this school was in what's called requires improvement, which is not a place you want to be. What was interesting though was that the school, despite having reports in 2017 and 2019 telling them they required improvement, also had these really lovely elements to the relationships with children were, as it's described here, a harmonious community of kind, thoughtful pupils who are proud of who they are. So the children were always wonderful. They came from, highly motivated families, wanting the best for their children. But the multilingualism seemed to get in the way of teachers being able to set high expectations for them. And I worked alongside them for 5 years. I'm still working alongside them, in fact, in partnership with Arnold Timont in Indiana. And wonderfully, in 2023, not entirely because of me, obviously, but because of things we were doing together and other things that they did, and because they're wonderful, they were graded by inspection as outstanding. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what it was they did to try and move the practice on. So one of the things they worked on very powerfully, as I keep saying, was school belonging. So there was a sense of they've got a welcoming committee. You can see the words of Makarim Ghazala there on the left, who's talked about how they use the welcoming committee to welcome children of different nationalities. And you get children of different nationalities, or you get children who are UK born, but who have home languages and nationalities that are different. There's a huge range of children in this school, kind of across the piece, as it were. So they started with school belonging, and they started with teacher mindset towards these children, and reading about, what it is to truly embrace children's linguistic differences, truly be a linguistically responsive and a culturally responsive teacher. That's where they started. Okay. But in terms of quick fix, these are not quick fixes at all, but in terms of fixes, and this took them years, and the schools I'm currently working with have been doing it for a term, and we've, because we had a very short pilot with them, but we know they're going to carry it on sustainably over time. These were the 3 things they found really made the difference. So they wanted to get the children talking more and the teachers saying less. They wanted great Oracy education going on. And the first thing they did was they changed all their classrooms. So classrooms in this school, and typically in the UK, would be of around 30 pupils usually, which may be very different from what you're used to in your context. I understand that. So it's not necessarily something you can take on. But they moved all the furniture around to make sure that no children were in groups of more than 4. And they found that these talking 4s, as they called them, imagine 2 children on one side and 2 children on the other side of a square. These talking 4s were really powerful in getting children to really engage with each other. They might start as pairs and then go into 4s. So that took a long time. That was the first thing they did, and it took ages. I mean, like 2 years, ages, not least because the pandemic rudely interrupted us in 2020 and a bit into 21 as well, but they carried on doing it. So that was the first thing they did. Groups of 4, the power of 4, they call it. Sounds simple, but it was remarkable the difference it made. The next thing they did was they took their curriculum, and rather than having learning intentions or learning objectives, for example, so both these questions here would originally, the first one would, why did the Romans invade Britain, would originally have been a learning module from the national curriculum called the Roman Invasion of Britain. All right. And the other one would have been one from the science national curriculum, just called Night and Day, or Light, or something like that. And what they did was they took hold of their science and humanities curricula, and they changed them into learning questions. So a bit like the inquiry-led curriculum that we saw a couple of slides ago, when the children were looking at how models help us do things in terms of looking at patterns of inequity. And that made a huge difference again. I remember watching a maths lesson, for example, where it was just very obvious that the children had been set up with questions to ask, and therefore they were talking because they were solving a maths problem, while the teacher was watching and facilitating, but not dominating. And that made a huge difference. And the other thing they did was they built their own discussion prompts using the Let's Talk sentence stems, but they made them their own, and all the schools I work with make them their own. They use this as a starting point and then create ones that they like. So this was 3 things: groups of 4, question-led curriculum, sentence stems. All right, 3 things, but it's taken them years. So they introduced it very gradually. They worked on it when they were monitoring things, monitoring practice. These were the kind of focus for senior management coming in and talking and watching what was happening. And they also picked up the enduring principles of learning and really owned them, which the schools I'm working with currently haven't done because it's a lot. But this school chose to really run with it. And they built in that sense of what is a critical sociocultural pedagogy is built into their school improvement plan and school development plan, into their mission and their vision for the school as well. Okay, so bear in mind, groups of 4, learning questions, discussion prompts. That's how they worked, okay? So I'm going to watch a teacher teaching now. This is Charmaine. She's happy for me to use her real name. And she works in this school, has worked for some time, and she's a very experienced teacher who's in charge of professional learning. So she mentors other teachers in teaching in this way. She's working with a class, which actually is not her class. She's just come in and done this as a model lesson for me, so it's all the more remarkable. And they're only what we call year 3 in England. They're only 7 to 8-year-olds. So they haven't been doing this very long because the school only takes children from 7. When they're 5, 6 and 7, they go to another school. And they're all at different stages of learning English, the children in the group of 4 that we're going to see. Some of them one has particular proficiency, others not so proficient. They're talking about a book called Oliver and the Seawigs, in which a boy called Oliver and his mermaid friend Iris need to help each other. Oliver needs to find his parents, who are very irresponsible parents who are explorers who've gone off somewhere. And Iris has terrible trouble with her vision and needs an optician for a new pair of glasses. Okay. Just watch, if you can, just watch and enjoy, but also try and see this kind of groups of 4, inquiry-led sentence stems. See how the children are using sentence stems to talk confidently without interruption. When we first come to the classroom, we see her working with one small group. It then moves to her working with the whole class. Okay, it's about 3 minutes long, so we'll just have a watch.
Once he's found his family. What do you, Ella? Because maybe Olivia can go to the big islands and find his parents. I think I disagree with your idea. Wait. Anna, you said that Iris Oliver can help Iris to reach the optician, right? But Iris is the only person that can really swim because Oliver never learned to swim. She just explored. But can the mermaid learn Oliver to swim? Why do you think about that? So Ella's asked a really interesting, given a really interesting point. She said, "Can Iris, the mermaid, help Oliver to swim?" But he could also go on the boat and use the paddles to swim instead of swimming and using his stamina and just relaxing. So you've come up with 2 different solutions there, which are really good, and you'll be able to do a picture of them when we come back together as a class. Okay? Fantastic. Well done.
I think Oliver's going to take Iris to the optician in the movie, and then Oliver gets lost because he doesn't know where the way is, and then the island tells them where the way is, and then they get their glasses, and then they find the parents. I disagree with Lucy because I think Oliver should hold the mermaid's hand so that the mermaid can follow Oliver, because if Oliver lets the mermaid hand go, then if Oliver went left, then the mermaid could go right. What do you think about that? I disagree with Ariana. I would disagree on my own idea. I think at least a co-pepper can fly to the opticians. What do you think about that, Doreen? Maybe the island could like you could tell the learner where the optician is, and then after she's the mermaid and her glasses, she probably could help get go on the sea and find lots of the places to go to, so you can have the island find where the island is.
Okay, so let's just kind of give you some time to have a think about that. I wonder what your thoughts and questions might be about what you've just watched in terms of critical sociocultural practice or anything,
Wow.
the observations you might have.
These were really very helpful to see a real classroom, and I really liked the idea of having this inquiry-based approach. Yeah, there was a question, I think, a comment. Isn't it a little bit chaotic? So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah, you do have to kind of embrace a bit of noise. You can't have talk and not have noise.
yeah. And another question is about, okay, how can we promote Oracy teaching if the students have little to no idea about the topic being discussed?
Right. Okay. So that's a very interesting question, isn't it? So what if there's no access because a student doesn't understand the topic being discussed, then I guess we need to be asking ourselves what topics are we teaching? We need to be sure that topics are relevant and meaningful and relatable to our students as far as possible. And I understand that can be very difficult for any of you working with a very set curriculum. So one of the ways in which some teachers I work with do that is they'll do something called pre-teaching, which I'm sure many of you are well experienced at, which is you work out what the main themes or vocabulary are of a topic before you start teaching it, and you have kind of warm-up sessions so that children can then access the curriculum before, because they've been introduced to these terms, for example. In fact, I'm going to show you a medium-term plan from that school in a moment that explains how that might be done over time. But it's about picking the right topics, going all the way back to Gloria Ladson-Billings a few slides ago, where she talks about it's got to be relatable. It's got to be relatable.
Yeah, would also learners contribute to the selection of topics, or?
That would be absolutely the ultimate aim, absolutely. So in terms of those enduring principles of learning that this school's working with, one of them is called critical stance, and that is about learners feeling they have agency to actually select the direction of their learning. Yes. And looking at again finding things that interest them. So I think it's perfectly possible to deliver some learning intentions within, a learning intention is just an intention, isn't it? But the vehicle we use can be relatable. And I'm going to again show you a slide that does that very well towards the end of this presentation.
And would teachers correct children's language at any stage?
So they would at some stage, but in that stage, that's a really interesting question and a very useful one, because you will have noticed that Charmaine doesn't correct. They're using she instead of he, for example, getting pronouns wrong, which is obviously a classic language learning thing. And I think no, at that, if you're just wanting to get dialogue flowing, no, you don't correct. The point is you want the dialogue to be flowing. So the children are perfectly able to make themselves understood to each other. And they having the dialogue is what gets the thought process is working, allows more vocabulary to come out. So the more fluent child, the more proficient child had greater vocabulary, for example, which those less proficient children are then listening to. Yeah, it's got to be a safe space. It's got to be a space in which you're building confidence and agency.
And I'd like to ask this once again, although you mentioned, what about how to cope with those shy learners, or some learners dominate than others? So how can we balance that contribution?
I mean, I think that's just a teacher's challenge, completely regardless of the setting they're in, isn't it? Or the type of learners they're working with. One of the things that I have found in my current project, which I haven't written anything about yet, so I need to get a wiggle on, is, in fact, I was just talking to a school this morning, and they've been using something called substitution tables, which you can find out about from the Bell Foundation's Great Ideas page. In fact, I should have given you that as a link. That's a great resources page. I'll perhaps send it through to people later. And they said for their children who are multilingual, that using this frame, it's a bit like using the sentence stems, to be honest. It's about having something there that helps them get started. And that's really helped them with their confidence and independence in talking in groups. But some children who are at very early stages of language acquisition are going to be quiet, aren't they? Because they're listening. So it's balancing the need to allow children to listen, and also building in scaffolds and structures that allow them to take part when they're ready to.
Yeah, it's definitely great practice for us as teachers. And one final question about the connection between physicality and oracy, how the whole body speaks. Does that come into your work?
Physicality and oracy. I'm not sure I understand the question.
Neither, but yeah. How the whole body speaks, is this about the connection? Maybe, yeah, it's not so.
Yeah, it doesn't come into my work, but that's a really good point. Is that so? And I think in a way, the term oracy tries to capture that, is that we all know that communication isn't just about the words coming out of our mouths or the words that we write on the page, isn't it? But particularly oral communication is about body language. It's about appropriate register, isn't it? Appropriate tone. So yes, absolutely, that does come, in terms of, if we think about those sentence stems in terms of when you want to agree or disagree, that would include, how do I do that? And what other aspects of my persona are showing how I feel, and am I behaving respectfully, for example? Yeah, great question.
These are the and turn taking and all of these.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well,
I hadn't thought of that, so thank you for raising that. You're absolutely right. We should be talking more about that as well.
Okay, so we can continue. We'll have one more Q&A in the end, and yes, please keep writing. Thank you so much, Naomi.
Okay, thank you for your great questions. I always love doing these things, because then I get to think about things I hadn't thought about. So it's very much two-way. So I'm going to show you some pictures now, which are just from schools that I've worked with or am currently working with, and just tell you about, how they have kind of shown these elements of critical sociocultural pedagogy and great oracy teaching that we've been talking about. So this is from this same school that I've been working with, that has the 97 or 98% multilingual learners. And this is their way of celebrating the languages in their school. And it also perhaps gives you a bit of an insight into what urban classrooms are like in England. If you were thinking that, as I said right at the beginning, that everybody looks and sounds like I do, they really don't. This is what that school would look like. So you've got Urdu and Pashto and so on as languages. It's interesting they've got 12 would speak English there. So that must be to do, the 98% multilingual must relate to heritage languages, but the family have identified English as the home language. So that's also a complexity that goes on with us as well. And where you've got less than 1%, as it were, they've named those languages at the bottom there, and you can see it's a huge variety of them. Another way in which I've seen this done, and which I wish I'd put the photo up, but I haven't, so I'll tell you about it instead, is a school I visited very recently. What they do is they have on the classroom door, these are the languages that we speak, and they have a list of all the languages that their class speaks, as it were, from the children. It's very simple, but it's about foregrounding the languages of the children. So going right back to what Alison Phipps said, it's about challenging the dominant status of English and foregrounding heritage languages as crucial to identity and what goes on for children. So that's one, that's school belonging, nice one. And here we are, this is the sentence stem. So this is with the school I'm working with at the moment. This is an infant school, which means the children are only between age 4 and 7. And this school chose to take the sentence stems as something they were going to work with in terms of Oracy education. And they divided them up into stems that they'll use with the very youngest children. So those are the 4 at the top. So literally they're 4 or 5-year-olds. I think I've noticed, I like, I dislike. So ways of engaging in conversation that are age appropriate, if you like. Then in what we call year 1, which is when they're 5 or 6, they get introduced to those green ones. And then in year 2, which is what is ages 6 to 7, they then go into these purple, slightly more complex, I believe. In summary, I'd like to add, I partly agree, but I also think I discovered that. So kind of their sentence stems, they've used them with all children. They're not just using them with their children who are multilingual, they're using them with all their children, because we also have issues around poor language and communication skills amongst some children who are white and British, and so they work well for them, but they actually work well for all children, including stimulating talk for our more able learners who you know are given the opportunity to articulate their thoughts in greater detail, as it were. But they have noticed, as have all the schools that I've worked with, that whilst it does work for all children, it works particularly well for their multilingual learners in terms of this encouraging confidence, going back to those quiet learners who don't want to talk, and encouraging independence in putting forward thought, which is only going to help literacy, because by the time you've articulated your thoughts, you're then much better able to write them, and you've perhaps been introduced to vocabulary that you might not have used had you not known them. So that's a really simple one, isn't it? So simple. And they you can take them on and off the board that they're on. They're laminated and just with kind of blue tack stuck to the board. And some teachers use them, they hold them up themselves in a small group, or the children just grab them and use them, or they just sit there like that. I mean, they're a very simple but very powerful resource. And I really like this idea of introducing them over time, not making children have loads all at once. So the sentence stems was one. Then I said to you that I was going to show you what the school I work with the most has done with this learning question. So talking about, again, coming back to one of your questions when you were saying, what about children who don't know anything about the topic? So most children in this school will not know about the Roman invasion of Britain, all right? But not least because of where they live, and might have visited, but also because their own families' histories and heritages are not related to Roman Britain. Whereas for British, it might feel like something quite familiar. I don't know. To be frankly, to British children, it needs introducing as well. And what they did was can you see with the lessons are also learning questions. So what is invasion, why invade Britain, and so on. And that makes the children the children are then given limited resources or managed resources by the teachers with which to find out about things related to those questions. So again, going back to the what if they don't know about the topic, this approach means that the children find out about the topic and therefore can then talk about it. So what is invasion was the first thing, and they used the book on the left-hand side, The Rabbits by John Marsden and Sean Tan, was used as like to discuss that. They always had to be very sensitive, very careful, because they have children in their school who lived in countries that were invaded or from which they were forcibly removed, as I know many of you work with. So they had to be very sensitive to, and they conferred with parents about how to do that, how to talk about invasion and having to flee before doing that. So there's all sorts of having to take into account what's going on in my school and in my children's lives in order to make it appropriately relatable as well. But that's how you get around what if they don't know anything about it. You find out together about it. Make it relatable. And here's the ultimately relatable thing that I've seen in my time as somebody working between the US and the UK. So this was from the US. And I know a lot of you no doubt work with some quite strict parameters in terms of the curriculum that you're working with, either a language curriculum for the teaching of English or the subjects that you might be working with. And this school that I was in, this was back in 2021, they had a very, very prescribed reading scheme, reading, writing, and social studies, and special standards that they had to meet. And it was all about American landmarks. So this teacher took a topic or a learning unit that was about American landmarks, things like the White House and things in, other things in Washington. And she chose to make it about Indianapolis, the city in which the children were living. And the vast majority of children in her class were African American or from Latino Hispanic backgrounds, so not white Americans or not part of America's white history. And she got them to have a look at, this was done during lockdown with 8 to 9-year-olds. And she got them to do an online kind of virtual tour of monuments in the city to look at whether they reflected the children's own lives. And you can see from the monument there, Indianapolis has the second most monuments in the US after Washington, apparently. I have no idea why. But a lot of them are like this. So if you look at the image in the middle there, you've got an enslaved person with chains broken, but still very much in a kind of supplicant position to the white kind of savior. So very much a kind of white savior history there going on, and one that the children in this classroom didn't really feel represented who they were. So she got them to go on this virtual tour of the monuments. She also then got them to listen to the views of different people, which was interesting, including someone from the Historical Society and the Indiana Landmarks Association, who talked to the children online again about why decisions in the past had been taken about the monuments and landmarks in their city and how those might change over time. So they had the whole history, as it were. They were critically engaged, if you like, with the whole subject. They were informed about what decisions were taken, and therefore felt enabled and empowered to move forward with the activities, which were design a new monument, literally drawing a new monument though most of them did monuments that celebrated freedom because they were feeling very cooped up after COVID, that celebrated their diversity, the cultural diversity in particular, and ethnicity, diversity of ethnicity in their school. But also they wrote a persuasive letter to the mayor of Indianapolis, asking him to make changes and could he consider this new monument. So there was a really clear purpose in terms of that engaging, intentional, relatable activity that was going on. And of course, lots and lots of talk and listen and discussion. So that was, in terms of the really making things relatable, this is probably the most powerful one I've kind of come across. So I've said a lot. I'm going to start wrapping up now with some very kind of brief key messages, because as you will have noticed, I do repeat myself a lot, because at the end of the day, it is about teachers saying less and listening more, and it's about children being given opportunities to say more. And the reason why is because Oracy Education supports the development of, we hope, confident speakers who can express their own thinking and challenge the thinking of others. Just think of that slide we just looked at in the previous slide. Oracy Education provides motivational language learning experiences that are relatable to learners' home and school identities. Again, coming back to your question about, is it motivation separate from language and literacy? No, definitely not. And Oracy Education will be promoted when teachers intentionally say less in order that learners can say more. And that's really hard. So some of the schools I'm working with at the minute, they've literally got someone else in their classroom, say a teaching assistant, watching them and then feeding back to them on when they thought that they could listen more and say less. Because it is really hard, because as teachers, we do feel we have to say a lot. And I've just said an awful lot. And I hope it's been really useful for you. And I think we have time for some more questions now, but thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. Thank you very much to the British Council for this opportunity to speak with this great audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Naomi. So we have some more questions. So some teachers may be hesitant to adopt this dialogic approach because of their concerns about noise or loss of control or perceived chaos. So how can we support and encourage these teachers as teacher educators to see the value in, or could teachers like teacher chairmen play a role in helping others?
Yeah, I mean, it is just really hard. I don't pretend for a moment that you can just suddenly do it. And I think where I've had the most success working with schools that do it, I have to be honest, it comes along with if the head teacher, I don't know what the equivalent is for you, the kind of principal administrative level in the school is on board. So I work in the first instance with head teachers and say, you know, what would you like to take on? I think also don't feel you've got to do it all at once. So the other way in which we work is the schools may choose one thing to work on at once. You know, so just get your learners used to talking in fours, maybe for 5 minutes in one lesson. Do you know what I mean? So you don't have to go for broke, and it's every lesson you teach, everyone's going to be in talking fours, and the teacher's saying nothing. That's unattainable. So just really kind of think of it in very small steps. To try and grow your confidence in it, because if you're not confident in it, then the children won't be either. Yeah, think of, let's have a go with sentence stems in one of my lessons a week, for example. Let's only introduce 3 or 4 sentence stems, not 10. And let's set up a really interesting question about something the children are really interested in, or the students are really interested in. Hope that helps. Yeah, small steps.
Yeah, so small steps, and also the importance of whole school approach, like the one we saw.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Slowly it will grow as a practice for teachers. And yes, some other questions. I mean, related to this one again. In my school setup, we always work with a local teacher. What if the local teacher likes to over translate because she feels that children do not understand how to deal with that? So yeah.
So that's something that I'm not experienced in, so I can't pretend to have an easy answer for you. Do you mean that the teacher translates into home languages when
Yes,
you, the teacher, are teaching English? Yes. I mean, if that's working for your children, then that's surely good. That's effectively good translanguaging practice. So I don't see a problem with that. But I'm not an experienced teaching English as a foreign language teacher, because I explained at the beginning how it is. But certainly in my settings, if there were a bilingual assistant, for example, who had the home language, let's say it's Polish, of the children, then absolutely she would be translating into Polish if she could, when the teacher was there, if she felt the children didn't understand, because the children need to have that back and forth of hearing both. Yeah, just hearing the English with no context is not going to go anywhere, is it? I don't think.
Yeah. And what about the classroom routines and activities that promote language development and inclusion?
I think in a way everything I've said is about the classroom routines and activities, isn't it? It's about how you group your children. It's about how you set up activities for them. It's about what your expectations are of them, in terms of when are the opportunities that when you could be talking instead of asking them to write, for example. When are the opportunities when they could be reading but talking about the reading rather than writing about the reading? It's to be honest, it's about everything.
Intentional, that's the key.
It's about it's about, yeah, and it's about in your planning, it's about looking for opportunities. Yes, that's what intentional means, really. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
resist temptation to speak more.
Yeah, but it's really hard, and to not be hard on yourself if you don't kind of do, you know, I talk too much when I'm talking with my pre and in-service teachers, especially if they're quiet. We all do it, don't we? But it's just it's all about how you set up the activity. So if the activity is a question,
Yeah.
then you're much more likely to be starting up conversation than if the activity is a we're learning about.
Yes, it's about the designing of those.
It is about absolutely about the design of the activities. Yeah. And I think I say that in the article that was set up as a pre-reading, where I had observed teachers in the US and the UK using the Enduring Principles of Learning rubric, that fundamentally it was about teachers saying less, but it was also very much about activity design.
And does it also work with adult learners learning English?
I couldn't say personally, because I haven't worked with adults learning English, but I know that where I've spoken with in-service teachers who have, say, older secondary age kids, sort of 16 to 18, they think absolutely these, things like the Let's Talk sentence stems, they think would be really, really helpful. So I can't see any reason why it wouldn't work. I mean, one of the schools I worked in fact, the one that had the Let's Talk sentence stems, she was working with 7 to 8-year-olds using something called fishbowl. And fishbowl is when all the children are in a circle, and in the middle there's a little circle of, say, 3 children. They are the fish in the fishbowl. And they are having a conversation using the sentence stems. If you look online for fishbowl discussion, you'll find it used with grown-ups, adults, all the time. So I think a lot of the techniques and activities are definitely, obviously with age appropriate content, are entirely appropriate for adults as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Naomi, for this really thought-provoking session. And you reminded us that Oracy isn't just about talking, it's about helping our learners think, express themselves, and feel heard. And it makes the classroom environment more inclusive as well.
It does.
Yeah, thank you once again. And thank you, our attendees, for your questions. And yes, thank you for showing us how powerful dialogue can be in creating more inclusive and engaging classrooms. We have received so many questions, but yes, we couldn't get to all of them. We will be sharing our feedback form with you, and you will be able to download a certificate of attendance once you share your feedback, and then the recording will be available in the next couple of days on our Teaching English website. So hope to see you all in our webinars, and don't forget to sign up to our newsletter. Our next webinar is Empowering Teacher Educators to Introduce Art-Based Translanguaging Practices on 20th of May. So looking forward to seeing you all in our next session. And yes, see you all.